Good morning, church. Thank you so much for inviting me today to your service. It's my honor to be here with you. I brought my partner, Cindy Acker, with me. And I want to thank Michael Harris for the reading of the scripture and for pointing out the banner, beautiful banner. Also want to thank Angela for the organ music. Oh, she's right there. I've never sat underneath the sound system, which is so majestic. When you all should try that one time. It's really a different experience. I want to thank the choir and Melanie for the beautiful music. Thank you. Music so opens our hearts and settles us down and prepares us for worship. It's been good to work with Reverend Cheryl, who so thoughtfully has worked on communicating and emails. And I'm sorry, Reverend Jorge is not feeling well. He and I actually go way back. When I was a pastor in Guerneville, some 10, 15 years ago, I took a 3-month sabbatical. And Reverend Penny had this brilliant idea. Reverend Penny has brilliant ideas. She had this brilliant idea to ask Reverend Jorge to lead the church during that time. And he said yes. And that was beautiful. And I actually was happy that I still had a job when I came back. Because they really did not want to let him go. But I'm glad to see that he made his home here at CCSM with all of you, and it's good to touch base from time to time. Now, when we were preparing for this service some 4 weeks ago, we could not imagine that today we would be standing here in a world that has radically changed. Politically, democratically, socially, with the Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade on Friday. Many of us woke up to that. And so for a second reading this morning, I brought with me words of Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who amidst other responses said this. She said, and this is our second reading, "My honest view is that things are likely going to get harder before they get better, and we will need to stick together. There's no doubt that things are bad, but that does not preclude the fact that slowly but surely some good can be growing as things fall apart. This is not some syrupy, sweet, silver lining case for optimism. Rather, it is really about a choice all of us have to make in life, either consciously or unconsciously. Will I be a person who is safe and creates good for others? Will I be a person who stands up?" She says, "When I sometimes tell my staff is that the world we are fighting for is already here. The world we are fighting for is already here, and it exists in small spaces, places, and community. It exists in this church. Much of our work is about scaling, expanding existing solutions. You are allowed to be scared. You are allowed to be angry and to grieve, but you are also allowed to create good, to be soft and enjoy the small reprieves. Struggle lasts as long as we do." AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Will you pray with me? Gracious One, in this time of incredible changes, we do what we always do. We come back to you. And so this morning we ask that you bless us. That you bless us in our personal struggles, that you bless us in our communal struggles. And God, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts resonate within your spirit. Amen. Amen. So let's start this morning with scriptures. What you heard was an epic story, and I would think that most of you know it well, of Jacob wrestling through the night with a stranger. And we pick up the story after Jacob and his family, his servants, all of his possessions. They have crossed the river Jabbok on their way back to their homeland. And then Jacob says, "Why don't you all go ahead of me so that I have some time to myself?" And scripture says Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. The scriptures do not tell us who this man was, why they were fighting, and why they kept fighting. And of course, it leaves a lot of room for our imagination. And almost all of the great painters have painted this particular battle. Rembrandt, Eugene Delacroix, Gauguin, Chagall. And I was hoping to bring some images with me this morning, but that didn't quite come to be. And I was just so excited to see this beautiful piece of art depicting the angel and Jacob wrestling. And just as layer by layer, brushstroke by brushstroke, a painting gets together and reveals an image that speaks to us, I think that sometimes we can look at Bible stories in the same way, that they are great pieces of art, great pieces of storytelling, conveying to us some of the depths and the meaning of human existence, some of the intricacies of how we relate to one another. And woven through these layers, we can grasp some of the mystery of divine presence. After all, if this story was historically true and verifiable, we quickly would need to come to terms with some challenging questions. For instance, if Jacob was fighting with an angel with majestic wings, why would he even take on that fight? And if he was fighting through the night, I don't know if there's any martial artists in the room or anybody who's done that. It's like after an hour, 2 hours of intense training or fighting, you're done. So to fight through the night. And if this man had the surprising power to touch Jacob on the hip so that he is limping, why not do that 5 minutes into the fight and be done with it? And what prompted them to such an intense fight? So like the paintings of the great masters, I think this story is a masterpiece of storytelling with a lot of truth running through it. Now, a friend of mine teaches Bible stories to sixth graders in the synagogue. And he asked the sixth graders when he was talking about this story, who do you think Jacob was fighting with? And some said, of course, the angel. Others said, God. And some of the kids said, well, maybe it was Esau. Maybe it was the spirit of Esau that already caught up with him. And then a girl, a sixth grader, said, I think Jacob was fighting with himself. Sixth graders are smart. And that certainly would be a viable possibility. It would not be far-fetched to think that Jacob had some soul-searching to do, had to wrestle with his past that was about to catch up with him. And when Jacob and Esau, Jacob being the younger brother, were younger, Esau came home. You know the story. Esau came home one day from hunting, was starving, and Jacob had prepared this lentil stew. And Esau said, give me some of that food. And Jacob said, okay, I'll give it to you if you give me your birthright. And it's like young people who don't think about retirement, don't think about a 401k that they need to put some money into. So Esau was like, I don't care about that birthright. The birthright, of course, meant that you would inherit all of the possession and wealth of the father. And so when Isaac was about that age where he was about to pass away, he had called Esau to himself and said, prepare me a meal so that I can bless you. Well, right then, Jacob steps in with his mother. They deceive his father, put on Esau's clothes, put on some skin with hairs on his hands and neck because Esau was much more hairier, and they went in to receive the blessing. And it worked. Esau could not see well, and he ended up giving Jacob his blessing, and in doing so, not only bestowed all of the riches, but also said, for you, every nation shall bow. Your brothers will bow to you, and all of the nations will bow to you. Esau, of course, when he comes back home, he's furious. And so Jacob and his mother decided maybe it's a good time to leave, to flee, and he ends up with his uncle Laban and serves there for 20 years. And there he gets deceived as well, ends up marrying twice. If you don't recall the story, you really should read it again. And I actually don't know if they're that appropriate for sixth graders. Now, on the evening before Jacob is to meet Esau, for the first time in 20 years, he may very well have some soul searching to do. And when he's alone, this man shows up and starts to fight with him. And Jacob finds himself in a struggle that does not seem to end, one that will not let him go, a struggle that lasts through the night. Know those nights? Maybe they're not physical struggles, but I think we all know those nights where our hearts and minds seem to be engaged in worries and struggles of the past, of the present, of the future that just won't ease up. And sometimes those struggles will turn to days, weeks, or months. A struggle for justice and are certainly struggles which will not let us go anytime soon. And as the night turns to day, the man says, let me go now. And Jacob says, not unless you bless me. And then Jacob gives the stranger his name, and then he starts to release the man. And it is those moments, that conversation that ensues when the fighting has ended, those are the moments that I would like us to focus on this morning. Imagine these two men. And unfortunately, I looked, there's no works of art about this specific time in the struggle. But imagine these two men, exhausted, sweaty, dirty, torn clothes, finally taking a step back and letting go. They're both grasping for air. They stop attacking, stop defending themselves. They catch their breath, and they're coming back to their senses. And Jacob releases the hold he has on this man and opens his hands. And it is then that Jacob says, "Who are you? Who are you?" And I think that's such an amazing question, because by now Jacob probably had some sense that he was not fighting with an ordinary man, that he had been wrestling with somebody much greater than him, someone who could bless him. And I don't even think Jacob was interested in the exact identity of the man. I think the question was more about, who are you? And who am I that I am so engaged in this struggle? How did I get to this place? Reminds me of the times that Jesus, his disciples, are asking similar questions. Often they seem to be shaking their head and are wondering out loud, who is this man? Who is this man that even the winds will obey him? And Jesus himself is asking questions as well. Who do the people say I am? And the disciples answer him. They think you are John the Baptist or Elijah. And then Jesus says, but you, who do you think I am? And again, that is not so much a question about identity, but I think it's more a question of, who do you think I am? And how is it that it awakens your heart and your spirit to such an extent that you are following me? Who do you think I am? Now, in the Gospels, Jesus is asked 187 questions. Some people actually track that. And he answers maybe 8 of them. Jesus himself asks 307 questions. The author, Kevin Nye, says, maybe faith is not about certainty, but about learning to ask and sit in the complexity of good questions. Maybe faith is not about certainty, but about learning to ask and learning to sit in the complexity of good questions. And I wonder if in those times that we feel a little lost in life, feel like we have lost our ways, if those are times when we have forgotten to engage the questions, the deeper questions of our heart and soul. Questions which accompany us on our journey. I was at a conference at the MCC churches some 15, 20 years ago, and there were some young adults in the process of transitioning, of changing their gender. And that was early on. People did not speak about it much. And there was a woman who was brave enough to talk, and she was talking about the journey that she had been on, these incredible decisions that were made about needing to take drugs, the surgeries. And I never forgot that after she was talking, that she said, I have this big question left. She said, I'm wondering, who will love me now? Who will love me now? And in that one question, you could hear the struggle that she's been engaged in, a struggle also that would not let her go. Who to tell, how to come out, how to come to terms with this change in internal landscape and external landscape. Who will love me now? I just recently started a new job as a chaplain at St. Paul's Towers, and I had about 1 week between jobs. 1 week when I left a job that I had been in for 9 years. And I thought, I need to get out. I need to find a retreat center or something that I can slow down and see where I am at. I was going to visit a friend of mine in Sacramento, but none of the retreat centers had space. And then I came across the Franciscan Living Urban Center for Spirituality in Sacramento, an urban retreat center run by Franciscan nuns. And that piqued my interest, but they also did not run any retreats at the time. But the woman I talked to, Sister Margie, said, you can make an appointment with me tomorrow and come by and we can talk. And I said, sure. And so the next day I was sitting in her office, which was located in a strip mall. And it was a bit hard to wrap my mind around that location. Nuns living and working in suburban Sacramento, but I was also very grateful for the opportunity to meet with her. And she asked me what I came for, and so I started talking. I was talking about the work I left, the difficulties I faced there. And then I realized I was just giving her the stories that already had run through my mind 100 times. So we shifted the conversation a bit. And I said I was curious about their lifestyle. Were they living in a monastery? Were they worshiping together? And it turns out that they live in residential neighborhoods, 2 or 3 people in a house. They did come together for retreats at times. And then Sister Margie said, and on Mondays, we come together with about 8 people on Zoom. And I thought that was kind of hilarious. Imagining 8 nuns, I mean, they were wearing regular clothes, but 8 nuns coming together on Zoom. And she said, during that time, we engaged the question where we have encountered the mystery that week. And I almost said, you do what? But my spirit seemed to wake up right in that moment. And I started to pay attention. Apparently, I was not there to talk, but to listen. Sometimes we mix those two up. And so I had a slew of questions like how do you do that? How do you look out into the world so that you can talk about where you have engaged the mystery? And Sister Margie let me have my questions, just like Jesus. She did not answer any of them. But can you imagine, just imagine for a second, that you come together with 6 to 8 of your closest friends every week, and during that time, you talk with your friends about where you have engaged the mystery, where you have seen the presence of God that week. Can you imagine that that will change who you are over time? Questions and conversations that have the power to awaken our spirit and the power to literally change you. The poet and author David Whyte, he's an Irish poet, I love him. He says, "There is no self that will survive a real conversation." That's something to say. There is no self that will survive a real conversation. Now, that sounds a little bit scary, but I think it's true. When we open ourselves up, when we disarm ourselves and allow somebody else or something else into the conversation, that has the power to change us. That is, I think, why endless conversations in our heads do not go anywhere, because they will not change us, right? We have to bring them out and talk to people. Jacob changed in his conversation with a stranger or with the angel, so much so that he got a new name. And this young woman I was talking about, daring to engage the deepest question and the conversations of her being, changed her identity, and he took on a new name. And I'm sure that these nuns in Sacramento, engaging these questions every week over time, changed, over time, felt even closer to the mystery. Now, David Whyte, I don't know if you've heard him, but I encourage you to listen to him. He also says this: "There is no organization that will keep its original identity if it is in the conversation." Now, church is an organization, right? So we can replace organization with church. So then it says this: "There is no church that will keep its original identity if it is in the conversation." And after a while, he says, you don't want to keep your original identity because you want to move the pivot of your presence from what you think you are, from you think you were, into the future with the people you serve. And of organizations and leadership, David Whyte says this: "The person you are calling to lead you will not be the person who is going to lead you. And for the person who is going to lead you, you will not be the church that this person think you are." Because in the conversation, and certainly when you invite Spirit in, you will be changed. We will be changed. The poet and mystic Rumi said, "What was it in the candlelight that consumed me so quickly? What was it in the candlelight that consumed me and opened me so quickly? What was it, and is it, about this church that drew you, that awakened you, that kept you engaged? And how do you now carry that level of engagement, that level of desire to seek the presence of God? How do you carry that with you? How do you keep that alive in this time and the time to come? And how do you want to participate in that process?" Spirit dances at the edges of those conversations. And when we dare to engage in that dance, Spirit might just growing us into the people that we need to be. CCSM, I think that this radically changing world needs you, needs us, needs our commitment to justice, our commitment to our faith, needs our presence, our hope, needs us to stand up. Following the news that Roe versus Wade got overturned, many of us felt sick to our stomachs. Realizing the impact now that the constitutional rights of women to have an abortion, to make autonomous decision about their own bodies, granted some 15 years ago, now that those rights have been taken away. And that may not be the end of it. Fears are widespread that other constitutional rights will be taken away as well. Justice Clarence Thomas said the legal rationale for Friday's decision could be applied to overturn other major cases, including those that legalized gay marriages and protected the rights of married people to have access to contraception. And the internet lit up with words of Senator John Conwell, who said, and I do not know the exact context, so we have to see in the weeks to come how he meant that, but he said, now Plessy and the board, Brown versus the Board of Education. And those are rights, civil justice rights, that we do not want to have hang in the balance. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez responded with outrage over the Supreme Court's decision, and she's been on the street protesting, and then she was asked for a radio interview. And somebody said, first question was, I don't know if I can say this in church, but somebody said, are we screwed? And I don't know if she responded exactly to that question, but there was also a question at the same time about whether she had any hope left. It's like, do you have any hope left? And that is when she is saying, I think that things will get harder before they get better, and we will need to stick together. But I loved her words when she said, I tell my staff that the world we are fighting for is already here. It exists in small places, in communities, in a church like this one. Much of our work is to expand the solutions that we already know. Solutions that already have been created by small groups of people that often are not even seen or known. So while we can't change the world in one day, we can and do have the power to make the world that we desire in our own communities. And we can go from there with faith that somewhere out there, in other places, people are doing exactly the same. And we will come together. You are allowed to be scared. Many of us are. You are allowed to grieve, you're allowed to be angry, but you are also allowed to create good, to be soft. Struggle lasts as long as we do. CCSM, this radically changing world, needs you, needs us. Pray that you will find and engage the questions that will carry you forward, that will keep your spirit at the edge of her seat. Pray for the conversation in which you are consumed by God's Spirit. Pray that you welcome the changes that are already happening so that we can meet the growing needs for justice and equality in this world. Jacob, in the midst of his struggles, the first thing that he said when he could speak again was, will you bless me? Will you bless me? And I think that's the place where we come back to time and time again in our personal struggles, in our collective struggles, in our communal struggles, that we come back and say, God, will you bless us? Will you keep us? And pray that we then may have the eyes to see the blessings around us, the mystery of God's presence in each other and in our community. May God bless us, and may God keep us. Amen.